Hey everybody. So this past weekend was Labor Day weekend, and so had a little bit of time, 3-day weekend, to go do stuff. It was also the weekend that Tenet was going to come out. Now, in the state of North Carolina, movie theaters are still closed, and they have been closed since they all shut down back in March. Last movie I saw, prior to the whole COVID thing happening, was Extraordinary on March 14th of this year. And nothing since. But then, movie theaters started opening up in other parts of the country. In fact, most of the country, about 65%, so a little bit more than half of the country. Movie theaters are open. People can, they can go out and, there's extra cleaning procedures, UV lights and, static smokers. There's capacity limits. Sometimes people can only sit 50% capacity or 30% or 20% depending on the corporate rules and the state guidelines. There's staggered show times so that there's not a rush to clean all the theaters at once, like back when I worked at the theater and we had a normal schedule, and things like that. So there's these basic precautions for that. You have to wear a mask unless you're eating concessions. So in all common areas, stuff like that. So basically, theaters are doing what is within their power to try and keep this as safe as possible while still keeping the doors open. So, 2 weekends ago, this is all in the United States, by the way. 2 weekends ago, movie theaters in the United States, brick and mortar, not drive-ins, started opening with the release of Unhinged. Unhinged, low-budget movie, low to medium budget from a new distributor. They decided to throw it out, kind of get some cachet as the first movie for theaters to be reopened, that kind of thing. Opened with about $4 million US. Not terrible for a movie that they're only trying to get to $30 million. It's it's like a low-budget thriller kind of thing. If there hadn't been the coronavirus restrictions, if you could actually fill up auditoriums and that sort of thing, maybe it would have grossed 7. I don't know. But since most of the movies that were set to open in the fall have been pushed to at least November, October for some, but at least November, and some have been pushed off the year entirely, there's pretty much a good 2 months here of September and October where there's not much competition and not much product. So that gives these movies a lot longer of a time to leg out. It's not just 2 weekends, 3 weekends, and you're done. So Unhinged open. Did okay for what it is. That movie will eventually get to profitability, I'm sure, through other ancillary streams, stuff like that. And then Disney, which bought Fox, decided to release the oft-delayed New Mutants. I guess there were some pretty heavy discussions about maybe dropping it to Hulu or selling it to a streamer or something like that, because it's, part of the now dead X-Men franchise until eventually the MCU reboots it in some way, maybe a multiverse thing, I don't know. There had been a lot of anticipation for that movie, mostly because of how many times it was delayed, the idea that it was sort of a Marvel superhero teen horror movie, that it had homages to Nightmare on Elm Street 3, that the studio wanted reshoots, and that the reshoots never happened, a bunch of this stuff. So New Mutants drops the weekend after Unhinged, so week 2 of movie theater reopenings, and it does about $7 million. For a movie that costs probably upwards of 50, I think, I saw on the skips. So not good for that. It's only going to go down from there. Even if it legs out, it doesn't appear to be legging out with very small drops, so not going to work. Now, if the theaters could have been filled up and everyone who wanted to see it could see it because they weren't afraid and that sort of thing, maybe it would have gotten double that, maybe 10, 14, I'm not sure, but 7 million, not the best. That movie's going to end up in the red regardless, but I think Disney knew that. I think they were pushing New Mutants out as a sacrificial lamb that had a teeny bit of buzz on it from Comic-Con and all the delays, and it was some people really do want to see this movie. Not a lot, but there's a decent amount of people interested. Let's push this out and see where it goes. Meanwhile, our prime cash cow of Mulan, which had mixed reviews, but spectacle and some China theater money, we'll put that on Disney Plus and we'll charge $30 for it, and we'll see how that goes. I talked about that in my last movie heavy video. But then the biggie was coming out on Labor Day weekend, Tenet, the movie that some people in the media were sort of rehyping as the savior of the indoor theatrical experience. Christopher Nolan is going to come to save us all. Not sure how realistic that ever was. I mean, most of Nolan's films that don't have Batman in them tend to open around 50 million and then they leg out pretty well. So I was going to wait. North Carolina had theaters closed, and the original date where they might have been allowed to reopen was going to be the day after I'm recording this, September 11th. That was when they were supposed to transition from Phase 2 to Phase 3. Theaters could reopen with, maybe 20% capacity, something like that. So I was like, all right, if I wait one weekend, the next weekend I'll be able to see Tenet. I'll be able to see New Mutants. I'll be able to see Unhinged. I'll be able to watch Bill and Ted Face the Music in theaters because Alamo will carry that when Regal and AMC won't because it also went video on demand, all that stuff. But then, before September happened, well, September 11th happened at least, the governor ended up delaying the beginning of Phase 3 and started more of like a Phase 2.5, of which indoor theaters were not a part of it. So now, the earliest that movie theaters in the state of North Carolina can open is October 2nd. So that bummed me out, because that basically means that it's still a whole month of September without movies, and even if they're allowed to reopen on October 2nd, staff training, getting all the files and the hard drives, all that stuff for the movies, planning out your schedule, all that stuff, it can't happen that day, so there's still probably going to be a delay between when they're allowed to and when they can actually reopen. Either a soft reopen or a hard reopen, not sure. So that left me a bit despondent. So the first thing I did was I decided not to wait, and I ended up watching Bill and Ted Face the Music. That movie's just delightful. Yes, it has very, very bad green screen effects. Really, really bad. I wish they had just built cheap sets instead of making bad-looking CGI that goes on longer, like the future set. And the ending is just sort of abrupt. You have a concert, and then it just sort of ends without an epilogue. Yeah, and it's sort of light, airy. It doesn't mean much. I think Keanu Reeves, it's a little harder for him to tap into his Tedness after movies like John Wick. But Alex Winter steps right into it. Obviously, we miss George Carlin because he passed away, but ultimately, I watched that movie with a smile on my face. The assassin robot Dennis is a highlight. The girl from Atypical and Samara Weaving playing the daughters are great. It's not a great movie, but the movie is a lot of fun. I had a smile on my face. I enjoyed watching it. Would I prefer to see it in a theater? Of course, but I enjoyed it. So then, had this 3-day weekend coming up. Had a lot of time, including potential time to travel. And Tenet is open, and it's not going to be open in North Carolina for at least another month. So then I started thinking, how badly do you want to cross state lines to see this movie? Traveling across state lines in the middle of a pandemic in defiance of a state's orders or state's wishes to not have this particular business open did feel a little wrong. But fuck it. I want to see a movie. Obviously, I'm not going to begrudge anyone who does not feel safe going to a theater. And in fact, I'm sure going to theaters is going to be hodgepodge depending on capacity, how rigorous that theater staff's cleanliness is, where it's not going to be an equal experience for everyone as far as whether they feel safe, whether the theater seems like it's taking the proper precautions, whether other patrons seem like they're taking the other precautions. There's a lot of variables out there. So I totally understand that. But for me, I don't see much of a difference between going to the movies and sitting there with a mask on for the entire period, because I normally don't eat concessions. Maybe a little different if Alamo were reopened, but in a normal theater I usually don't get concessions. Sitting far away from other people with hand sanitizer, one of those, I have a Bath & Body Works pocket back. It's like a little jack-o'-lantern thing with some noise, and I usually put the vampire blood hand sanitizer in it, carry it with me everywhere, so I always have hand sanitizer. Then again, most of the public places you go into now, they're awash in hand sanitizer, and I only mean that lightly figuratively. It's not like the March and April where you couldn't find the stuff. Well, the stores seem to have plenty of it. But I felt safe in theory going to do it before I even got to a theater. So, yeah, but especially if you consider, North Carolina allows indoor dining, obviously with distancing. Keep your mask on until your at least your beverage gets there, or going to stores or anything like that. Because I don't know how long most people dine for when they go out to eat. An hour, maybe two if you have a large party. I don't know if you have dessert. There's other factors, but it seems like sitting in a room, not talking, to fire out COVID particles, not facing another person because you're facing the screen, is safer than sitting at a table, communicating, eating, gesticulating, masticating, I don't know. Especially when a lot of restaurants I've seen, sometimes the wait staff doesn't completely cover their nose with a mask. I see a lot of people not do that, patrons in stores, things like that, and do you not understand how the respiratory system works? Of course the answer is no, but, So, if I go out to eat, and I only go out to eat with, family or close people, obviously, because, if it's just me alone, I'll order something or, just run in to catch something, like when pumpkin spice came out and I ran into Starbucks. But, I have family, I have my fiance, if we're doing something, people like to go out to eat when they're not, skinny little picky eater fucks like me. So I don't feel like indoor dining, with your mask off and all that stuff is as safe as sitting in a theater. Unless it's a theater that didn't have any capacity restrictions, then that'd be a little icky, but with the capacity restrictions, with only 20-30% of a theater allowed to be booked, sure. Or even going into stores where, sometimes patrons try to slip off their mask, sometimes their nose is bitty, people touch items and then walk away. I don't know. People don't really social distance in stores either because of narrow hallways and stuff. Sometimes stores have capacity restrictions and then you annoyingly have to wait out in the line until they let the next, 5 people allowed by fire code or whatever. But, I don't know. That's just me. I'm not encouraging you to go out if you don't feel safe. I'm not shaming you for not going out if you don't feel safe. If you don't feel safe, you don't feel safe. And you know what? You're probably more right than I am, because if you stay at home and you social distance and you only go out for essentials, which is what I do 99% of the time, you're much safer than if you take unnecessary risks, and going out anywhere in public right now is an unnecessary risk, unless you have to go out for your job, in which case it's necessary because you don't want to starve, and or be homeless and stuff. But I still, because of those feelings, because I don't see much of a difference between what North Carolina is allowing and the theater which they're not allowing, I thought about leaving the state to see a movie. Now, if I'm taking my desire and my love and need to go to the movies out of the equation, it's not so much that I blame North Carolina for not opening theaters, it's that I blame every other state for reopening them, really. So, it's sort of a problem with the state federalist system of the United States anyway, where you have a patchwork of laws and, little fiefdoms in states, without a unitary central federal law for the most part. Obviously, federal law exists, but most of, the stuff that applies to human behavior is state level. That could also be worse if the person at the head of the federal government is, a wannabe fascist dictator like we have now. But that aside, generally that patchwork system is rough, and it's certainly rough in the middle of a pandemic when each state government can't decide how they want to treat this thing, and so you have 50 plus DC different systems of how to work this. But if my state's going to be closed and every other state surrounding my state is going to be open, and I really wanted to go to the movies, I was going to go to the movies. So, first step was to look for how far the closest indoor theater is. And it turns out, I don't know if this is the absolute closest, but this seemed to be just through a Google map search, that the closest theater open was about an hour and a half to an hour and 40 minutes away, in a little town called Danville, Virginia. It was much closer than anything in South Carolina, because Raleigh, where I live, is a bit toward the top of the state more than the bottom. And it was closer than Virginia Beach or anything like that, or even, obviously, there's Northern Virginia where they have a couple Alamo draft houses, and I would have loved to have seen Tenet in 35, which Alamo was going to get, if it had opened at my Alamo at least. But that's a little too far. An hour and a half for a movie that's 2.5 hours seems a bit more worth it. So, this past Sunday, went ahead and went the trip to Danville, Virginia, to go to this theater. Now, this theater wasn't owned by AMC or Regal. I forget who owned it. I think it was something like Georgia Theater Company or something I've never heard of. I know it was that because they were still playing Bill and Ted, which the major chains will not because of the VOD thing. So, got the tickets on Fandango, showed up, and the town looks a little, I don't want to say podunk, but it's not a thriving metropolis by any stretch of the imagination. And then the theater on the outside didn't look particularly impressive either. It looked like maybe it had, been a second-run theater just a couple of years ago or something like that. So I walk in. By the way, and also there was, almost no cars in the parking lot, so it seemed like it was almost like a dead theater, like no one's going to be there. And this is, granted it's a Sunday, not a Friday night or Saturday night, but it was Sunday at, noon on a 3-day weekend. Now, I know Labor Day is traditionally one of the slowest movie weekends as far as long holiday weekends go, but I still expected more at 12:30, or at 12 o'clock. My showtime was at 12:30, there was also a 12 o'clock show earlier. So I walk into the theater, and it is probably the cleanest, most immaculate theater lobby I've seen in quite some time on a weekend. Remembering that I used to be a manager of a movie theater, so I know how tough it is to keep those places clean. They only had about 3 staff members visible that I saw who were in concessions, all masked. Concessions looked like it was pretty small. There were not many patrons at all, in the lobby at the very least. And I had to use the restroom before going into the theater. 90-minute drive, 2.5-hour movie, and that was absolutely the cleanest movie theater bathroom I've ever been in. Movie theater bathrooms, even the private little cubby bathrooms Alamo has, are not generally known for being clean. Even if they're not dirty or disgusting or anything, there's usually a bit of water on the floor or something. This was kind of immaculate, and I guess you can chalk that up to the fact that it wasn't very patronized, and it wasn't particularly busy or anything like that. But yeah, it was super clean. I didn't even see nary a popcorn kernel on the floor or anything. So as far as seating goes, I tend to like to sit pretty close to the screen when I go to the movies. I find it to be a more immersive experience, and generally other patrons don't like to sit that close, so I have more of a chance of being alone, or alone-ish in general, than if I sat somewhere else, and that sort of avoids the possibility of people talking around me. Yeah. So when I looked at the Fandango chart for the movie, basically there was X's on every other row, so you could only pick seats in every other row, and some rows were completely blocked off. And then it was just the two of us going to see a movie, so there wasn't anyone else that ended up sitting in my row, so I don't know how many seats they were leaving between parties. But Tenet was showing in a fairly large auditorium. I think there were 6 or 7 rows in the front section, and then another 6 or 7 in the back section. And we were the only 2 people who were sitting in the front section at all. The entire front section was just the 2 of us, so it wasn't just 6 feet, it was 30 feet between me and the nearest patron. And then in the back section, my screening still wasn't very populated. Maybe another 10 people tops. So not many for a matinee Sunday showing for, the big movie to save cinemas or anything. Now, I don't know if that's just this location. Obviously, Danville, Virginia doesn't seem to be near anything, so they might not be very populated or busy on a general basis anyway. I can't judge how this theater would operate on a normal Sunday versus a post-COVID or still intra-COVID setting. But not very at all, and so I have to wonder if that's the demographics of where this theater is located. Maybe there are better theaters that people go to in the area, or maybe there's just not that many people who live in the area, so that theater was dying even before COVID. I don't know. It didn't look run down or anything, so it looked like it was doing fine. I mean, the marquee outside is a little old, but other than that, Or Maybe it's that the audience for this movie came out on the Friday and Saturday, or they were coming on the Sunday night as opposed to the Sunday day matinee, because, Labor Day, people have cookouts, all that stuff. Maybe it was that. Or maybe it's just that even if you live near a theater that's open and you want to go to a theater, you're just not comfortable doing so. I don't know the answer to that, because my experience is just so far at this one theater in this one sort of out-of-the-way town that I have no knowledge of, aside from the fact that they had a Sheetz. The experience of the movie was pretty good. Originally, the sound was playing and the picture wasn't, so I had to go out and tell the person at concessions that so they could fix it, and they did. They fixed it just in time for the movie to have the pre-trailer to the Dune trailer. It wasn't the full Dune trailer that dropped earlier this week. It was like a pre-30-second thing that showed some of that. I thought we were getting like an exclusive theater-only trailer to Dune that they were going to wait to drop on the internet. But then I saw the thing and it was like on September 9th, and I'm like, well, the movie's obviously going to open on September 9th. It might not even open in December where it's set to open right now. So it's like, oh, they're just giving us a little in-theater, a little teaser, they're just edging us a little bit on Dune. Spice must flow, or should it? So I saw that. I think I saw a little bit of the Wonder Woman 84 trailer, and that also might be pushed back too. And otherwise, I just heard the audio of everything from before they fixed it. And then the movie started. So, 2.5-hour movie. I didn't get concessions, so I wore my mask the entire time. I did not see a porter or an usher come in to check anything, so I could have taken off my mask if I had so wanted to or chose to. But even if I could have, I didn't want to, because even though there was literally no one sitting within 30 feet of me in this theater, I'm just sitting in the third row, smack dab in the middle, many, many rows away from the next human being I didn't actually go there with. It's still an interior place with heavy AC. Things can circulate in the air. I left my mask on. The only annoying thing about watching a movie wearing a mask, if you have glasses, is the glasses fog up. I know I've heard things about like washing them with shaving cream and all these other tools you can use, or nose clips or whatever. I just haven't pulled the trigger on any of those. So my glasses would fog up a little bit. It wasn't a big deal. It's not like I couldn't see the movie at any time. It was just, a little bit. The movie itself, though, I really liked it. People have mostly just complained that there's not enough character development, things like that. I understand that. It didn't really bother me because this movie isn't a character drama. This movie is a Daniel Craig era James Bond movie that happens to have time travel. I did not expect the movie to be as funny as it is. Not that it's a comedy or anything. It's not like there's a joke every scene or anything. But there's a sly sense of humor to the main character, who's just called the protagonist, as well as the Kenneth Branagh Russian oligarch villain and stuff. So I found that to be quite delightful. The action sequences, I think, work well. I know people have said they're confused by the story and the plot. I was never confused. I always knew what was happening and who was who or what timeline people were in, for the most part. The only thing is that I don't know if all of the time inversion travel stuff works if you put it under a heavy microscope of examination. Like, why the machine exists in certain points of time, that sort of thing. I mean, yeah, you can argue that inversion of time wouldn't work this way, but no one fucking knows. So it's more like, if this was sent back to here, how would that work? And just sort of like, I'm not sure if it holds up against like paradoxes and things like that. But as I'm watching the movie, it didn't particularly bother me. I was along for the ride. I'm like, all right, this makes sense on the terms that you're attempting to make sense on. Robert Pattinson's really good in it. There's a lot of cool globe-trotting places and everything. I like the motivation of the villain to explain, because a lot of the movies like this have a problem where the villain wants to basically like destroy the world or whatever, but the villain's part of the world, so what are they getting out of that? This movie explains that. It also does a decent but not heavy-handed job of explaining why this technology was created and what it exists for. So I like that, and I also like that it doesn't dwell on it. I mean, a lot of this movie is 3 exposition scenes, action scene, 3 exposition scenes, action scene again, for the most part. I didn't mind that though. I was fine with the explanations because they're told in an entertaining way. The action sequences work really well, so I thoroughly enjoyed Tenet. I know it's getting lesser reviews, but I think some of that is just the hype of it. The idea that this is a big blockbuster, but it's a thinking man's blockbuster, and it's the movie that's going to save the theater industry. And if we have to push it back 2-3 times from early July to early September, my God, this is the movie to do it for. This is the movie to break your self quarantine for, and all that stuff. And it's not a masterpiece. It's not even close to the best film Nolan's ever made. I like it better than Interstellar. Maybe at the same level of Inception, which I think is a good but very overrated film. Better than Dark Knight Rises. Not as good as Dark Knight or Batman Begins. Certainly nowhere near as good as Following or Memento. Maybe same level as Insomnia. Not as good as The Prestige. So it's middle to high in Nolan's filmography, but I very much enjoyed the film. So, would I go to the movies again in this pandemic? Well, the answer is yes, because this weekend we're actually taking a little bit of a day trip out of state, this time to South Carolina, and I might slip away for one of maybe New Mutants or Unhinged at that point, because those are the other two new movies that have been released in theaters that I'm interested in seeing, now that I've already watched VOD Bill and Ted. But I certainly, in this case, I felt perfectly safe when I went. Everything was clean. 0 people sat near me. I had a mask on the entire time. I felt safer in that theater than I felt in any North Carolina restaurant I've sat in, and quite frankly, into any store I've walked in North Carolina, including grocery stores for essentials. I felt safer in that room than anywhere else except for my actual home. So take that for what it will. That's just that one theater. If I do go to the movies on my trip to South Carolina, it's probably going to be an AMC or Regal, so a bigger chain. It's going to be in a bigger town or city, so maybe that experience might be different. Maybe I won't feel as, but it's worth a shot. And, the theaters here aren't opening until at least October 2nd. But at least, it was just shy of a 6-month stretch between Extraordinary on March 14th and Tenet on the day before Labor Day. That was a bit rough because I usually joke, and it's not really a joke, that I go through movie withdrawal, and normally, under normal circumstances, that happens if I go 2 weeks without going to the movie theater. This was almost 6 months, about a week away from 6 months, a little bit more. Wow, that was it's been rough. That has been literally the hardest part of quarantine COVID specific stuff I've been going through, where my one major enjoyable activity and coping mechanism was not available to me. And that has been rough, because watching movies at home, VOD, whatever, it's just not the same experience. And I understand if you don't feel that way. I super understand if you don't want to go to theaters until there's like a vaccine. Not gonna blame you, not gonna pressure you, not gonna call you names. That is perfectly your right, and I accept that, and I actually applaud you for that, because you're probably a better person than I am. But for me, someone who is not experiencing any symptoms, so I did not feel like I was endangering others. I did not feel that I myself was endangered. I'm glad I went and crossed state lines to go see this movie. Now, it's been just shy of a week since then. If another week from now it turns out I get COVID, maybe I'll do a mea culpa video. But otherwise, I was very happy to go see Tenet, and even if I had to go 90 minutes outside of the state to do so in Virginia. Anyway, that was my experience. Leave a comment below. Are you able to see movies where you are? I know I have some friends in Canada. There's some people in other countries. But some of you also probably live in parts of the United States that are not North Carolina or Los Angeles or the state of New York, or whatever other places. I think maybe New Mexico. There's a couple other places that make up that other 45% of the country that doesn't have indoor movie theaters right now. But if you are in a place with movie theaters open, have you gone to the movie? Do you feel safe? Did you go to the movie and then not feel safe and regret it? Are you someone who's in a place like me where you can't see movies but you still traveled? I read an article on Deadline about some guy who drove 4 hours for Tenet. That's maybe a little crazy. An hour and a half, reasonable, especially for a movie that's longer than that. 4 hours, it better be a surprise sequel to Fight Club or something for me to go 4 hours out of my way. But yeah, leave a comment below. I'm very interested in your own experiences if you have done this or if you're deciding not to do this. Even if you hate someone like me who is doing this and think I'm an asshole for going out in the middle of this to see a movie. But I wear my mask correctly, at the very least. Cover your fucking nose, people. Fucking idiots. Alright. That's all I got. If I do go to another movie this weekend, I will probably make a shorter video about that experience, unless something really interesting happens during it. Otherwise, have a good rest of your week, everybody. Talk to you the next time I have an update about something.